I spend a whole chapter talking about what are the elements of repair in my book when there is conflict, because we so desperately need this on a national level as well as in our homes equally. And that is that there's two main outcomes for untreated abuse that I have observed over the years of being a therapist that I think are very important for us really as a human race. Reiterate that what I'm offering comes from my world of psychology and psychodynamics and family functioning. And an economist might have a different view, but I really believe that our collective mental health is the biggest missing piece in sorting this, is to offer what could be healing, not to blame, not to shame, not to hate the haters, not to attack, but to call out what's dysfunctional and potentially very, very dangerous.
In the following episode, I speak with Phyllis Leavitt. Phyllis is a psychotherapist with over 30 years of experience, specializing in abuse and family dysfunction. After co-directing a sexual abuse treatment program, she ran a private practice and focused on healing trauma. Recognizing the link between individual mental health and social well-being, she wrote America and Therapy to apply therapeutic healing principles to national issues. Now retired, Phyllis writes and speaks on mental health and social healing, aiming to inspire hope and action in overcoming cycles of violence. Enjoy the conversation. Welcome in the Wake Insights, Phyllis.
Thank you so much for having me here.
I'm really happy to have you here, and certainly now in these important times that you are in. The elections are coming up in the US, and
Right.
You wrote a book, America and Therapy. So I want to know everything about this. And maybe first of all, I would like to know why you wrote specifically this book with this title.
Yeah, I think because, as a therapist of so many years and so trained and experienced in family dynamics, and, mostly, even if you're working with an individual person, you're still working with their family of origin dynamics that have impacted them for better or for worse. And it became really obvious to me, as I think it has to many therapists, that our family dynamics are not exclusive to our family of origin. We take our family dynamics with us wherever we go, the parts we've learned to play to survive the best we can in the families we have, and we take them into the workplace, we take them into our marriages, we take them into the way we parent, and we take them into our larger communities and our social functioning and into government. And so it just became really clear to me that all groupings of people are operating on some level of either healthy family dynamics or dysfunctional and abusive family dynamics, and that in the world of psychology, we know so much about how to help interrupt the cycle of violence or abuse or neglect that is not being applied to some of the greatest dysfunction that happens on larger levels of society, including government. And so I felt like I wanted to bring that awareness to, whoever can hear, but to make it sort of common knowledge that a lot of what we're operating on in America, and certainly this is true for many countries around the world, but I talk about America because that's the country I know. Many of the dynamics that we operate on in our largest institutions, including government, are actually abusive and hurtful to many, many people. And especially, as you know, from probably being aware of what's going on in America today, there's an escalation in very violent rhetoric and inciting people to violence and rewarding people for complying with very dysfunctional dynamics. And a lot of people are like, how is this happening? Why is this going on? But the whole point of why I wrote the book, and I really want to emphasize this, is not only to make it common knowledge what some of these dynamics are, which I think a lot of people don't know because we don't train everyone in the world of psychology, But the whole point is to offer what could be healing, not to blame, not to shame, not to hate the haters, not to attack, but to call out what's dysfunctional and potentially very, very dangerous with the eye and the lens of how can we heal? How can we bring ourselves back off the ledge of so much violence and destructive political dynamics and social functioning?
Amazing. Yeah. Can you explain a bit, so what's really going on today in the United States? We have like two parties, the left and the right, which is, yeah, very exceptional, and at the same time, yeah, can cause a lot of conflict, and certainly when you see that it's almost 50% that is going to the left and
I
to the right,
know,
so the country is very divided. So
very.
how did we end up here? Do you have an explanation on that based on your experience in psychology and these dynamics you mentioned?
Well, I would say that half of my book is devoted to that. Like, how did we end
Mhm.
up here? So,
Yeah.
to try to put some things in a nutshell, and to just reiterate that what I'm offering comes from my world of psychology and psychodynamics and family functioning. And, an economist might have a different view. But I really believe that our collective mental health is the biggest missing piece in sorting this out. And the reason why I say this is because mentally healthy people don't incite violence. They don't want to kill other people. They don't want to withhold resources or steal resources from other people. They don't hate and discriminate. So it's a sign of growing collective mental health that so many people are invested in these highly dysfunctional behaviors that we would never want or allow, if possible, in our own homes. So we have this disconnect between what we all want for ourselves, which is love and belonging and safety and being provided for, and the tools to navigate our disagreements without violence. All those things that we want for ourselves, we're somehow condoning be done to other people. And some of the things that I talk about are, well, there's many things, but I'll try to isolate a few important points
Mhm.
and those are only two of many, many things, but also to recognize that people who came to America after the Native Americans were here by themselves, all the people that came to America were actually immigrants. And
Mhm.
many of them were fleeing persecution and poverty and religious persecution and war and jail. And they brought their traumas with them.
Mhm.
And none of those traumas were ever addressed because we didn't talk about psychology back in those days. We were just
Mhm.
trying to survive. So a lot of dynamics of persecution and abuse and neglect actually have gotten passed down in different ways through many, many people that have never actually been healed.
Mhm.
And they flourished with slavery and with the persecution of Native Americans. They flourish now with the persecution of people of alternative sexual identity, or the ways that we still marginalize immigrants in our country today and people of color. So we have a foundation that's not totally healthy. And yes, there are many people who brought their strengths and their gifts here and were adventurous and inventive and have done and still do wonderful things for other people. But we
Mhm.
have this base of unhealed trauma. And I can tell you that as a therapist of over 30 years, the level of abuse and neglect that I have heard stories of from people just like you and me, people who are
Mhm.
functioning, who go to work, who raise their kids, who have a dog, who go to the dentist, is very high. The
Mhm.
level of emotional abuse and physical and sexual violence in homes in America is much greater than probably most people would like to know or do know. And that may be true around the world. And certainly we know it's true in many parts of the world. And that level of abuse and dysfunction has lasting effects on people. And that's what we treat in the world of psychology, that
Yeah.
we treat the harm that people have done to one another, that have created wounds that then repeat themselves in their adult functioning.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot of that, and I can tell you more specific details about what those dynamics are, depending on what road you want to go down in our conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the fact that it repeats itself, meaning actually, and it's something I recognize, of course, like generational trauma.
Right.
It's a thing. It's really, yeah, proven that it's something that's happening. How,
Absolutely.
and to me, it's has all to do with the level of consciousness that people have around that. Because
That's right.
a lot of people don't realize actually that they are in this pattern, and they developed coping mechanisms. You have a lot of addiction you hear about in the United States, but it's everywhere
Yep.
in the world actually. But people need to understand what they are in, what that they are carrying trauma, and that the only way out is to heal and to dive into themselves instead of looking for external solutions. So I believe that your book contributes to that, to increase that level of consciousness. Can you explain a little bit what is your strategy around that? How do you see what would be a good way actually to, yeah, to increase the level of consciousness to everybody in the United States, as the title
Yeah.
of your book? Since the launch of this podcast, I haven't really introduced the True Impact Club yet. Are you looking to expand your network with other well-being entrepreneurs? Or you want to gain valuable insights into industry trends, business strategies, or sales and marketing? Or maybe you're looking for potential collaborations to grow together with like-minded entrepreneurs. If so, the True Impact Club might be perfect for you. It's a community where we meet bi-weekly to share our stories and journeys. Are you interested in joining? Just visit trueimpactclub.com to find all resources you need to become a member of the community. Thank you, and let's continue the conversation.
Yeah, well, and that this sort of half of the book is really about exactly that. It's really about educating people in a non-judgmental, non-hateful kind of way. Like, this is what's happening. There's a way to call out abuse and neglect without desiring retribution or labeling people as horrible people. Because one of the things that I've discovered as a therapist, and I think many therapists can tell you the same thing, is that inside the perpetrator is a victim.
Mhm.
And so, in order to stop the cycle of victimization and perpetration and violence, we have to commit to helping heal everyone and stop looking for who to blame. And that's the tenor of our country today. Who's to blame for your ills? And and often the people that are targeted by the highest levels of institution and government are not even doing anything. um, it's almost like we have to find somebody to blame for our ills instead of what you said, which is the heart of psychology and psychotherapy, to heal our own wounds, because that's the access to actually changing our human relations.
Mm.
So what I do in the first part of the book is really try to educate people about what are the dynamics of abuse. Exactly as you just said, many people don't even know that that's what's happening. I had a client that was being terribly abused. She had been abused all through her childhood. She was still being abused as an adult by one of her parents. And she had no idea that it was abuse because it was all she knew. And because the message to her was everything that happened to her was her fault. So she
Mhm.
just believed she was a bad person and she deserved what happened to her. And when I told her that she was being abused, she looked at me in shock.
Mm.
And I think, and that's an extreme, but I think it's not uncommon that people don't actually know that these are some of the nutshell things I can give you
Yeah.
that apply to a country. Abusers in individual families blame their victims for what they do to them. You wore
Yeah.
that tight skirt, you were asking for it. You talked back, so I had a right to beat you. Whatever, you're failing in school, therefore I'm going to lock you out of the house, rather than seeing that they're at all responsible for the symptoms that their victims manifest. So perpetrators, abusers, blame their victims for the abuse that they heap on them, and then they blame them for their symptoms. And
Yeah.
in our country, just to zoom out for a minute, and you probably see this all over the world, um, But for instance, we have widening economic gaps. We have many people living below poverty level, many children living below poverty level, who are discriminated against, can't get a good education, are often not hired because of the color of their skin. And then they're poor and they go on welfare, and we blame them and we call them entitled, rather than seeing that in the family of America, we're not treating people the way we would want to be treated ourselves. So we
Mm-hmm.
blame our victims for their symptoms. We also, abusive parents or abusive adults in a family will also really go after the truth tellers. If somebody tries to get help or call out that they're being hurt, often they're either totally alienated, kicked out of the family, or they're the subject of more abuse for actually telling what's going on. And we do the same thing in America. They're peaceful demonstrators who marched for, the Me Too movement. And when George Floyd was murdered, people were demonstrating peacefully for Black Lives Matter, and they were
Mm-hmm.
tear gassed and shot with rubber bullets and jailed. So and again, we're looking at the dynamic to identify it, not to hate anyone, but to say these are abuse dynamics and they have lasting effects. People who are hurt don't just go silently into the night. And I talk about this a lot in my book because I think it's really not common knowledge that among all the symptoms like depression and anxiety and obsessiveness and rigidity and poor boundaries or rigid boundaries or violence and hatred, or there are many symptoms of untreated abuse, and we see them all the time in our offices, all the
Mm-hmm.
time. And if we didn't trace them back to their origins, we couldn't help people. But there's two main outcomes for untreated abuse that I have observed over the years of being a therapist that I think are very important for us, really, as a human race to know. But I speak to America, like I said, because I'm an American.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is happening all over the world. The two main outcomes of untreated abuse look like these two things: learned helplessness on the one hand, and identification with the aggressor on the other.
Yeah.
So many people who are completely overpowered and hurt, whether they're sexually assaulted, physically abused, or verbally and mentally abused, or their resources are withheld or they're kicked out, whatever happens to them, many people feel so overpowered that they've given up trying to defend themselves, and they become helpless and hopeless.
Yeah.
And they carry that out into their adult life. And that's why you often see, and I've worked with people who have had this, who stand by and they cannot protect their children because they freeze inside
Yeah.
because of what they learned. Okay,
Exactly.
so that's one side. The other side are those victims of violence on some level who will do anything not to feel their vulnerability, and they identify with the aggressor and become like them. They have to be one up. They
Yeah.
have to be the top dog, and they often mirror the same hurtful behaviors that were aimed at them when they were victimized. But they're
Yeah.
both victims, and we have to know that.
Mm.
Um, and one of the things that's so beautiful, I'll say this last thing and then please jump back in.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
one of the things that we know from the field of psychology that I'm positive is not common knowledge is that both those who learn to be helpless or become addicts or who are highly depressed or anxious or whatever, and those who identify with the aggressor, the kids who become the bullies on the playground, and the
Yeah.
people who run for office who become bullies,
Yeah.
they're all victims, and their symptoms, whether they're learned helplessness or identifying with the aggressor or any of the other symptoms we mentioned, are a cry for help.
Yeah.
It's like when the body is in pain, it's
Mm.
telling us it needs help, it needs healing.
Yeah.
And so we have to look at both sides of that spectrum as a call for help. And I believe the world of psychology has a lot of the help that we really need.
Yeah, it's definitely there. And I think we learn more and more actually about what it really is and how to work with that and solve it in a way. Because I believe that the last few years there's a big evolution happening about the recognition of trauma and how to heal
Right,
trauma.
right,
I know of like 10 years ago, psychologists had a completely other perspective on trauma and also had a completely other treatment around that. So there's a lot evolved in the past few years, and also now
right.
with this new media, people are much more informed about it. It's just a
That's right.
matter. It's just a matter of actually getting attention, because yeah, people these days have a very short attention span. There's so much information available, and it's easier to get attracted by information that gives you pleasure, that you can use as a certain coping mechanism for all your problems and all your pain that you have, instead of listening to something that goes into your pain, triggers you a little bit, but is maybe the solution to your problems and to
Right.
what's actually going on. So I'm wondering how you look at that. How you have seen that evolution, of course, that information decade that we were in, and how do you think? Because also, yeah, you were talking about different generations, right? Yeah, like you talk about younger people and you talk about people that are in power, they have position. It's much more difficult for them actually to see what's going on and to change that. um, there is more potential in younger people. So I'm curious, do you see a way um, to so that these younger people getting more informed about that and see what the real problem is and then can start their healing journey? Hey, just a quick note from our sponsor, True Impact Agency. If you want to set up marketing funnels, create landing pages, or start advertising campaigns, they have years of experience offering these kind of marketing services. You can just get in touch with them through the website, through impactagency.com, and there's also a free ebook for you to download, where you can learn how to turn quality leads into paying customers. Thank you very much, and let's continue the episode.
Yeah, I mean, I think many people are trying to address that from many different levels. There's programs in our schools to address bullying. I think we're becoming aware now. I don't know how common it is, this awareness, but I think we're definitely becoming aware now that this rise in mass murders, for instance, these are terribly disturbed people who have been terribly hurt or abandoned or neglected or violated in some way without any help. They've been the subject of bullying or sexual violence or completely broken homes and addiction, and they're hurting. And I think we know that now that, we've lived in a culture, and I imagine this is true around the world, that just believes there's good people and bad people. And if you're a bad person, you just deserve to be locked up and or killed
Mhm.
and thrown away, rather than realizing that no baby is born a bad person. No
Mhm.
baby is born a murderer, a rapist, a tyrant, someone who will exploit people. No
Mm.
baby is born that way. Something happens to us in our conditioning
Yeah.
that sets us up to either be functional and loving and caring and peaceful, or violent and inhumane and
Mhm.
unempathic and exploitive. And I think that is coming into awareness at the same time that there are many forces in our own psychology as human beings, and certainly in many people in positions of power, that don't want that to be common knowledge.
Mhm.
That the way to hold on to power is to control people. And people who become informed, who become knowledgeable, who begin to understand the origins of abuse and neglect and exploitation are a threat.
Yeah.
And that's why you see the silencing of truth tellers and the attack on journalists that we're seeing, and so much
Cancellations.
misinformation. Yeah.
Yeah, the cancel culture is what I call it, right? In the past few years. So yeah, that's totally true. It happens more and more. You see that people really come actually with new revelations, new insights about certain topics. It can be mental health, but it can also be, yeah, other important things that are happening in our society. Think about a pandemic. Think about other issues that we have today, and you see that, yeah, powers, how you can call them. Sometimes you call them deep state. There are a lot of terminologies for that. They succeed actually in canceling this kind of information.
Right, because it's a threat to their continued power. And power
Yeah,
is addictive. Power is addictive. And like so many other things, it's highly addictive. And those many, not all, but many people who attain positions of great power, whether it's an abuser in a family or someone who's the head of a state, don't want to give it up.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's totally true. Yeah. So,
But so
yeah.
and let me just jump in and say that where the hope lies, because I want to say there's hope. We know so much about how to help break the cycle of violence. We don't know, there's no one size fits all. There's no one thing that cures every person. But we know so much about identifying the cycle of violence and abuse and so many of the principles that really help heal it. And one of them is, and I'll say this, and I've said this many, many times when I've spoken about my book, is that what is the main thing that brings people to therapy? So if we're talking about a person, a family, a couple, or a country, the main thing that brings people to therapy is pain.
Yeah.
Pain that is overwhelming, pain that they don't know how to heal, pain that they don't even know what caused it. But in some way, life isn't working enough that they're willing to get help. And
Hmm.
so one of the hopes of my book is that we can actually feel our pain in America and really around the world enough to say this isn't working.
Hmm.
Too many, there's more and more mass murders. There's more and more children who are lost in a world of social media and gun violence and addiction, and having no solid home foundation to come back to. When does our pain become great enough, and when do we understand that numbing it out with substances or money or sex or power is not going to heal us, and that we're actually hurting ourselves? So that's part of my call is, can we feel that pain and
Hmm.
look for the help that's already there?
Yeah.
We know how to help people sit down and listen to each other and stop the fighting. We know how to help people do that if they want to. There's guidelines for nonviolent conflict resolution and communication that could be applied on a governmental level. And what a role model for our society and our young people that would be.
Hmm.
If we saw members of Congress actually having respectful, open minded conversations with a goal of resolving differences for the good of the family of America, exactly what we want good parents to do, right?
Yeah. 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 Totally. And I think there are initiatives actually to support people and to help people, but the question is also what kind of support can they get, and what kind of support is, for example, the government willing to give? And that's again in the topic that you said before. Actually, they don't want you to know everything, and they don't want you to become a truth seeker. So what I actually see is that there is more support available, but it's like to cover the symptoms, and because there is a whole economy built
That's right.
on the mental health, to be honest. Like,
That's right.
you can think about everything, like all the coping mechanisms that people are developing, that's all an economy that is worth trillions of dollars. You think about the sugar industry, you think about illegal drugs industry, you think about all kinds of industries that are actually, yeah, developed on the coping mechanisms of people that have symptoms of trauma.
Right. That's absolutely true. And I think it's that perspective that you just said as a piece of a huge perspective of what the ills of the family of humankind are right now, that makes so many people feel helpless. Like,
Yeah.
what can I do? And I think a lot of people feel more and more like that in America and maybe around the world. Like, what can I do as one person?
Hmm.
And that's exactly what an abusive system wants you to feel. that
Yeah.
there's nothing you can do, so you don't do anything. And
Yeah.
so part of my message is we can all do something.
Mm.
And it's really true. Maybe what one person can do is be a more loving parent and partner and raise
Mm.
their children in a more peaceful home. But
Yeah.
you know what? That's a contribution, because their
Mm.
children are going to go out into the world and be healthy human beings looking for mental health and trying to create that in the world around them in whatever they do. Or maybe what you want to do is be somebody like me, is write a book and share
Mm.
what I've learned and hope that my message will get through to someone,
Yeah.
and maybe what you want to do is go help inner city families build gardens on their rooftops so they can grow their own healthy food.
Yeah.
Whatever you can do is a contribution. And I think we just need to hear that, because I
Yeah.
know that I have felt helpless and hopeless at times looking at what's going on in the world, and feeling helpless. And we talked
Mm.
about learned helplessness earlier, is one of the worst things an adult can feel, or any person can feel. It's hugely painful to feel
Yeah.
like there's nothing you can do in the face of harm. And so I think we have to mobilize ourselves and really help each other understand what we can each do, and then celebrate what each person does instead of
Totally.
criticizing it's not enough.
No, yeah, for sure. That's so true. Yeah, and also the most difficult thing is actually to ask for help.
Right.
So once you are there and ready to ask for help, then that support should be there in the best way possible, actually, because that's already a big step for a lot of people.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think therapy's had a bad rap to a certain extent, a lot of stigma around, like it's a sign of weakness, or you should be able to figure this out yourself. We shouldn't need that kind of help. And I think that's slowly changing here in America, but I
Mm.
don't think it's totally a common feeling, that we could actually celebrate ourselves for
Yeah.
being open to get help, because none
Exactly.
of us has all the answers.
No.
But I also just did want to throw in that what you're doing is something that's a great contribution. And I think the podcast world is an amazing resource now for people to have
Mm.
a voice that's outside of the control of mainstream media. Um,
Totally.
and it's a fabulous service. You can reach thousands of people just by
Yeah.
doing a recording.
That's totally true, and I'm happy you mentioned that for sure. And also, podcast is under attack because also there, podcasts are getting cancelled, or the platforms try to, put their power on it, and that's why
Right.
there are some alternative platforms that are getting developed and things like that. So it's a good evolution. So at the end, if people want to consume certain kind of content, they will find it, and that's a good thing. People know that it's available, and people can just focus on the stories and the content and the information that they want to hear, actually.
Right.
And that's really interesting. Yeah. Another question, I want to go a little bit to your own story. So you're doing this work already for many years, and
Hmm.
I'm actually very curious why is this so important for you, actually? What was a moment in your life, maybe, or maybe certain kind of events in your life that made you decide to do this kind of work, evolving to writing a book? But I think you wrote a few books already, so I want to hear a little bit your personal experience.
Yeah. I mean, my personal experience has everything to do with what I'm doing, like so many people, that we sort of evolve to champion something that's helped us. I was abused as a child. For whatever reason, I had an inordinate amount of pain growing up that I tried to hide. I was very ashamed of feeling like I didn't fit in. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I had no memory of anything that had happened to me when I was growing up, because a lot of it happened very early on. And I just felt very other. I suffered from some of what I talked about, especially the learned helplessness, and I was very ashamed of that. And at the same time, I always knew there was something else inside of me. I knew there was a life force that really wanted to get out, that wanted to find expression in the world. So I had these two things sort of running side by side, but they were completely separate.
Mm.
And the way that I coped as a young person was to become a really good student. I actually loved school, and I loved learning, and I loved reading. So that was great that I had that. But I put my whole self into being a good student. And at a certain point, I got involved in a spiritual group. I got married. I had 3 children. I was in a very dysfunctional marriage.
What did you
Um,
study, by the way?
well, I studied English in college. I was an English major, but then I went back to school and studied psychology when
Okay.
after my children were born. But I was an English major. I just loved reading and I loved ideas and
Hmm.
but at a certain point, it all fell apart. It totally fell apart, and I was, maybe what you'd call the dark night of the soul when I was in my 30s, and I finally went to therapy, and it changed my life. It
Yeah.
just changed my life. I began to put some pieces together. I began to remember what happened to me. I did a lot of, several years of very deep work and became a therapist. And
Yeah.
that's really what happened for me. I understood that my early conditioning, and particularly the very hurtful things that had happened to me, had everything to do with how dysfunctional I felt, that I wasn't born that way. There wasn't, my essential self was still there, and it had been calling to me this whole time. And that's really my story. And then what happened was, I did an internship in graduate school in a sexual abuse treatment program, and that was very, very educational for me. I worked with
Mm.
some really wonderful people, and I learned so much about the whole, more and more about the dynamics, because you don't learn all that in graduate school. You really don't.
Mm.
And then I began to put two and two together. I thought, well, if I suffered so greatly from what happened to me, and I still had food to eat, and I wasn't living in a bombed out village, and, nobody basically knew, my outer world looked pretty okay. If I was suffering that terribly from what happened to me, what about all the people who whose suffering is overt, who are living in poverty, who can't get a job, who are hated because they're black or a woman
Mm.
or they're disabled or whatever? What about all of these people having massive trauma, no safety, no access to help? And I thought, we're in this big family that's not only not treating its victims, but is victimizing.
Mm. Mm.
And so I took everything that I learned about family systems and healthy and unhealthy families, and just couldn't help but see it playing out all
Mm.
around
Mm.
me.
Yeah. Mm. Wow. Interesting. There's a question that's coming up into my mind actually that I sometimes speak about, but never really asked. And I think now it's a good opportunity to ask you that. So, for someone that wants to succeed in life, what is the most important? Is it being raised in a family that doesn't live in poverty, that has the meanings actually to finance your studies so that you were able to go into school, or is it actually the way that you're raised in, having a warm connection with your parents? Your parents were always there, or is it someone that has a good upraising by the mother and the father that were always present in the family? So, what kind of person has the most potential to succeed in life?
I mean, there's probably a million answers to that question, but the thing that comes to my mind first is that I think the people who have the best chance to succeed in life are those who live in an environment, whether they're rich or they're poor, that is loving and kind and
Yeah.
committed to peaceful conflict resolution. Because conflict is really where the rubber meets the road. What happens when we don't agree? And we'll always not agree. People will never see things always exactly the same way, nor should we. We all have different perspectives. And in the best of all human relations, we value that people have different things to bring to the table. So I think the people who have the best chance of succeeding are those who live in a loving environment that's safe, where they're provided for, where there are good boundaries. This is where I end and you begin. I have to make way for you as well as I want you to make way for me. And that we're committed to resolving our distant differences without hurting each other.
Hmm.
And I call that high-tech human relations in my book. We
Okay.
want high-tech everything in this world except human relations. And that's
Mm.
what the conversation I really wanted to bring to the table with my book.
Okay, yeah. You see, a lot of these stories are appearing like successful entrepreneurs, and
Right,
and they say, yeah, we were immigrants, we're coming for a poor
right.
family, we are refugees, we had to escape war and come to United States, and I became a successful entrepreneur. But I did the analysis of all these people that are really successful, and in a lot of cases, I see that they talk about their mother, and they talk about their love of their mother and the support that they had from their mother.
Hmm.
On the other hand, the ones that are raised in a family with money, they had nothing short of. They were able to finance college and all these kind of things, but they didn't had that support of the parents, and maybe because ambition, career was much more important actually than taking care of the children, right? And then you would expect actually, okay, but you have everything, you can be successful in life, but there you don't see so many cases of people that are really becoming successful because and there you see, and I don't know the stats around that. There's probably some research done around that, but I see that many that with this background, they are more struggling actually than the other ones that are raised in this warm nested family.
I think that has to be true because, and we have such myths here in America that are still alive and well, that a sign of a success is wealth.
Yeah,
And it's not.
it's not.
And you can't take it with you. And there are people in our country and around the world who have billions of dollars that they're going to die. They're going to die like everybody else. They're not going to take that with them.
Yeah.
Um, and what are they doing with it?
Mm.
What are they do and I've worked with people who are very wealthy, who were miserable because of the conditioning that they received in their childhood that wealth can't compensate for.
Yeah, but the thing
And
is
that
that
doesn't mean it's wrong to be wealthy. I'm not saying that. If you're a
mm,
success in life and you're happy and fulfilled, great. But we have this illusion that that's what makes people happy and that's what
yeah.
deserves respect rather than the way we treat one another.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think you can be wealthy and then do a lot of good things with the wealth that you earned. And I
Totally.
see there are a lot of good examples about that. And then also, if you study these people, these are mostly the ones actually that didn't build their wealth on their pain or on the trauma that they
Right.
had. You know, they build it actually because they're really entrepreneurial and they want to make a change in the world. They are
Hmm.
very creative, because if you're re-traumatized, it has an impact on your creativity as well. You're more gonna operate out of willpower and prestige and want to do things, but your creativity is not always available. It is of course not for everybody. um, but the ones that are unsuccessful, they have that creativity and they are there actually to develop yeah, amazing products, amazing services in the world. They are successful, and once they
Right.
got wealthy, they're gonna support and they're going to give their wealth away to other good purposes. So there are
Right.
a lot of examples about that. But of course,
Exactly.
as you say, you also have the other ones, and are the ones for whom it's never enough. They have 1 million, 10 million, 100, 500 million. They always want more, and they're greedy, and it's never enough. And that's probably the group that you were talking about. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and again, there's nothing wrong with the whole idea of being successful.
No.
It really just comes down to how do we treat each other? How does a
Mhm.
really successful person treat their employees? What kind of a work environment do they create?
Yeah.
Do they help people succeed? Do they honor people for their contribution? These are all, we don't have to have the same amount of money in the bank. We never will. But
No.
we can all treat each other kindly, with respect, support each other to be our greatest selves. And going back to what we were talking about what are some of the dynamics of a healthy family that we were talking about, where there's love, where there's safety, where there's being provided for, where there's some kind of loving justice when a kid needs to be corrected or whatever, that in that kind of an environment we tend to be able to contact what our own real calling and gifts are, rather than in a highly abusive or rigid environment in which you're just expected to become this or do that, and you're taught not to listen to your
Yeah.
own inner wisdom and calling. And that's not just about what you're called to do in life, but I think in an abusive family you can't even listen to your instincts because
Mm.
you're on survival all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And so we have, I would say millions of people who are living on survival. And it's a
That's
terrible way to live.
Yeah, totally true. Totally true. And I think that's also the state where you don't have that creativity so much developed, um, because you're in survival mode.
Right,
You're operating in a different kind of way, and it's not always that conscious. And it's more from the mind that you start develop strategies actually as to cope and to operate in the society.
and what we
Yeah.
were talking about earlier about learned helplessness or identification with the aggressor, most people have no awareness that that's what they're doing. They're
No.
just really trying to survive.
Yeah, and also what I see is that these people at a certain time in their life, they maybe start to realize that they are not the same as everybody else, and the only way to be accepted in society is to copy other people,
Right,
to to look at others, and yeah, and that's the only thing they know, instead of looking, going inwards and into themselves, and healing, and see, okay, there's something I have to work on. No,
right,
it's more like copying the outside world and other people just to feel accepted.
right,
And 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 that's a strategy that you can develop, and it can be something that you develop over the years and the rest of your
right.
lifetime.
And I think one of the unhappy parts of social media and the internet, and I do think that there's wonderful things happening with social media
Mhm.
and the internet too, like this, or like you can look up anything at any time,
Yeah.
and get information. But one of the sad parts is that there's a lot of pressure, at least here in America, to look and be and act and dress
Yeah.
and talk a certain way rather than like deep encouragement for like, who are you and who do you want to be and what do
Yeah.
you feel inside and what
Mm.
calls to you, and again, these are all elements of a healthy family system, whether it's in an individual home or a community or a nation.
Yeah. It's totally true. Yeah. In your book, you talk about the win-lose paradigm. Can you explain a little bit more what that is exactly?
Yeah, I think that's what we've all learned. And I think maybe humanity has been living in that paradigm forever. At least maybe not every culture in every part of the world. But for how I grew up, definitely a win-lose paradigm. Somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. And in America today, as you probably see in the news, it's very heated up now. Like, I'm going to beat you and I'm going to destroy you and I'm going to jail you and I'm going to kill you. And that's the extreme end of that continuum, which is just total conquest and total subjugation of the so-called loser. And we know in the field of psychology that dynamic is very unhealthy in an individual family or for individual people or in the workplace, right? In an individual family, when there's good human relations and we're relatively healthy, and I always say this, like, nobody does this perfectly. We don't,
Mm.
and we don't have to expect that we will. We just keep doing our best to embody healthy human relations. In a healthy family, it's not a win-lose paradigm. It's not the parents win and the children lose. It's
Yeah.
not one partner beats the other, although in dysfunctional families, that is the case.
Yeah.
One parent overpowers the other and silences them or beats them or kicks them out, and happens with children as well. But in a healthy family, the desire is for everybody to win.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that a child tells the parent what time they go to bed. It doesn't mean that that there's just no boundaries or no structure. But what it means is that when there are boundaries and when there is structure that is implicit in a family functioning, it's done with the best intentions for everybody's good,
Yeah.
whatever that is. That doesn't mean a child won't rebel when they have to go to bed. Um, and I think that's what the win-win paradigm is. And if you take couples therapy as a good example of that,
mm,
when a couple comes to therapy, they're usually deep in some serious conflict, some serious separation, division, inability to get along or resolve arguments or whatever. Okay? The therapist doesn't side with one person.
mm,
Even if one person overtly seems to be the rager and the other one is, sort of overpowered by the anger in the home, the point is not to take sides and say, the one who's being yelled at should win and the other one should lose.
mm,
The point is to help them heal the dynamic.
yeah,
So, what caused that person to be a rager? What wound are they reenacting in their relationship? Most likely, they grew up with ragers or they were hurt to such an extent that all the unexpressed rage is now coming out in their intimate relation or something else.
mm-hmm,
So we help everybody heal so that the relationship becomes a win-win, because
mm,
that's what we all want. Nobody wants to be in an unhappy marriage or
no,
or just be fighting all the time. And what makes that work is a win-win. And I'll say this because I spend a whole chapter talking about what are the elements of repair in my book
yeah,
when there is conflict, because we so desperately need this on a national level as well as in our homes
yeah,
equally. And that is the bottom line for repair is that I take responsibility for myself and I
yeah,
stop blaming you and I focus on where am I coming from?
yeah,
What wounds do I need to heal? Is there a way I could talk to you that is more respectful?
yeah,
Am I talking to you the way I want you to talk to me? Am I listening to you the way I want you to hear me?
yeah,
Am I really committed to resolving this, or do I just want to beat you? I'm
mm,
right and you're wrong. Um, and the problem, of course, we know this in our personal relations, but it's playing out all over the world in the highest levels of functioning, is
yeah,
I'm right and you're wrong, and I'm going to make you submit to me rather than can we sit down and work this out? Because the
mm,
other person thinks they're right and I'm wrong,
yeah. That's
right?
true. Yeah, totally. Yeah. We have to accept that we are all different and we sometimes have different opinions.
Right,
I think it's just a matter of respecting each other and have some empathy for each other. It's a
right.
two-way direction. Totally. Yeah. And you mentioned it on national level, it's the same thing. And I'm very curious about how you look at that at the
Hmm.
moment. If you see that the country is divided in two parts, we have the elections coming up now. So, yeah, one side will be the winner and the other side will be the loser. So,
Hmm.
how do you see the future, the near future actually, of the United States at the moment? And
Yeah.
maybe it will, yeah, extend to the rest of the world because the United States is involved in other parts of the world, undoubtedly. So, do you have some ideas around that? How that will evolve? Some
Well,
scenarios?
well, I think that there are things that, I would love to make common knowledge. First of all, I just want to say that when I was growing up, and I've lived through many, many elections, um, it was never like this when I grew up. One party won and one party lost in every election, but there was never this kind of hatred and threats of violence. It was
Mm,
just the way it was. Sometimes it's a Democrat and they do their policies, and sometimes it's a Republican and they do their policies, and we accepted that. I have no memory of it ever being the way it is now. And
yeah,
I think that the way it is now is actually a symptom of our declining mental health, because
yeah,
mentally healthy people can accept a loss.
yeah,
Mentally healthy people can go on and continue to advocate for what they advocate for without threatening violence for anybody who disagrees with them.
mm,
So that's why I wrote my book, because I think it's our collective and individual mental health from the bottom up on the family and community level and the top down from the highest reaches of government that is really falling into abuse dynamics without knowing that that's
mm,
what we're doing, and that we could actually bring, like, some of the things I talk about and I think about are having mediators in Congress and holding people to the guidelines of nonviolent conflict resolution. Um, and really looking at our mental health as not as like, oh my God, that person's crazy, but
Yeah.
what created this? What created this? What happened to that person in their childhood? How could that be healed?
Mm-hmm.
And bringing that to national awareness so that when we go to vote, we are looking to empower people who could actually support a healthy family dynamic in this country.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of education is what needs to happen. I don't know what the fallout from this election will be. I certainly hope that we have the good sense not to fall into violence, no matter what the outcome is.
Mm.
Um, there are many, many, many people out there who are speaking to that. I really don't know it, and it's definitely worrisome for many, many
Yeah.
people, whether regardless of who wins,
Yeah.
what
Yeah. Yeah.
what the outcome will be. So for me, I come back to exactly what I was talking about in the beginning because it can feel really overwhelming and scary because I
Yeah.
think it's scary. Um, I come back to what can I do? Who can I be? Who
Yeah.
can I help influence in a way that I think is constructive and toward peace and toward resolution? And I'm just going to keep doing that as long as I
Mhm.
live.
That's amazing. Yeah. I think that's the best you can do. Things that you can control for yourself. These are the
Right.
only things you should focus on, actually, because, yeah, all the other things are basically out of control, of your own
Hmm.
control. You can look at it, you can analyze it, you can have opinions about it, but there's
Right.
not a lot you can do about it, actually.
Right.
So yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, when you were explaining that, I was also thinking about the pain. So we are, yeah, really in a situation where you feel more like the collective pain. If you talk about trauma, you have the personal trauma
That's
situations, but
right.
you have the collective trauma situation.
That's right.
I had an episode before this one, actually, about someone that is studying that for a few years already now as well, and yeah, it's really interesting to hear his analysis around that as well. But what I'm saying is, we are in that situation where we feel the pain, and sometimes on a personal level, you see the only way out is that people collapse, or a system collapse. Something has to collapse, and then actually,
Hmm.
it's the time to say, yeah, I can't control it anymore. I can't go any further anymore. Something needs to change.
Right. Right. And a
Yeah,
system may need to collapse. And, certainly that has happened throughout history. My desire, my heart's longing is that our system could collapse without mass murder and civil war and, acceleration of hatred and blame and targeting of innocent people, because that's the way of an abusive system. And, I'm my heart breaks for that possibility, and I want to
mm,
do my share in having that,
mm,
influencing that not to happen, and know that I'm not alone. I'm not the savior of the world, and no one person is.
no,
But collectively, if we can feel our camaraderie with those who are on the same wavelength of really working toward peace and safety and love and care for one another,
mhm,
that's where power lies.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
Appropriate power.
Yeah, totally, totally. Hmm.
One of the things I talk about in my book is, and I talk about some big paradigm shifts that I feel that we really need to make as larger groupings of people, that we see happen in families that begin to heal, or in people's lives when they do the healing work. And one of those is our relationship to power, that we really need to learn how to share power and not
Yeah.
keep it all for ourselves. And in a healthy family, that's what happens. A wife has a say, a husband has a say, children have a say. They may not have all the parent power that their parents have, but they're heard, they're respected, their thoughts and their feelings and their needs have a place at the table. And that's a healthy family. And there's no reason why, without the will to do it and the knowledge to do it and the urgency to do it and enough pain behind it to motivate us, that we can't do it.
Yeah.
And I think our lives depend on it. Honestly, I think our lives depend on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally, yeah. That's beautiful how you say that. Yeah, we have to share the power, and that's really true. That's really true. It feels so relieving actually if I just hear you saying that, um, because yeah, we know that power is so much concentrated into the few, one person, a few people, and you
Yeah.
feel that there's a lot of side effects on that, and it's not healthy to having so much power, and also the tendency to keep the power,
Right.
and all the symptoms that come out of that. So the only way out is really find ways to share the power, and yeah, to become
And
powerful together.
right. And to understand that when people are overpowered in really hurtful ways, they
Yeah,
become symptomatic.
yeah,
The rage inside them is either going to get turned on themselves or on other people or on the earth or
mm,
animals or children or their employees or um, you know what I'm saying? It's like we're creating a powder
yeah,
keg in humanity if we don't understand that if we hold power that way in the win-lose model, in the power over model, that we're actually creating the very thing that we don't want, which is
yeah.
more violence in our society.
True. Yeah, yeah. It's true, but if you think about it, these are all very complex structures that are created over the years. That together with the lack of consciousness, awareness about what's really playing and what's really going on and what's just really important in society and in life, makes it hard, and something that is not solved overnight, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think I just want to reiterate that we all have a part we can play that can be of help. Every
Mm,
single person can. There was a beautiful story, a very sad story that I read about a man who had committed suicide. He jumped off a bridge, and when they went to his apartment and, wanted to see if there was a note or, just what was there was a note. And he said, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to jump off this bridge unless one person smiles at me on my way there. And obviously,
mm,
no one did. And it's not anybody's fault, but that's how lonely, that's how alienated, that's how desperate this man felt, that he just needed one sign of
yeah,
human connection
yeah,
to want to live. And there are many, many people who feel that alienated. And we can all be that person who smiles at a stranger, who offers
mm.
them a seat, who opens the door, who helps them carry their groceries. We can all be that person.
That's true. That's true. We can be that person, but at the same time, knowing that most of our society is struggling with their own mental health issues, people that don't really feel fulfilled and happy inside, if that's your state, it's difficult to smile to other people.
It's absolutely right. So it's
Yeah,
for who can. It's for who can. You know,
yeah. But but
absolutely.
you can work on it. You can make yourself happy and make other people happy, and understand that you can actually influence other people's state. That's also an important one, I think, because sometimes, and I can speak for myself as well. I know when I was younger, my states were sometimes dependent on someone else's state.
Totally.
Some person that stands in front of me and is angry at me, or feel frustrated, or feels triggered. That triggers me. That makes me feel bad. So that dynamic, if you don't understand, if you don't know what that is, then you're the victim of it.
That's right.
As until you understand what it is, and that can take for such a long time. And that's the same in a positive sense. If you talk about smiling, if you talk about giving someone good energy, good vibes, yeah, it's contagious in a good way.
Right. And when you think of all the children who grow up in homes that are abusive or violent or neglectful, who are getting terrible messages, seeing rage, seeing people beat each other, seeing
Yeah,
conflict that doesn't get resolved, they've absorbed all that. And
yeah,
it's not their fault.
no,
And we have to understand that victimization that lies in the heart of so many little children that they carry out into the world. And really, I believe that the access to one of the accesses, and there's many obviously that we've talked about and many that we haven't, to breaking this cycle is to really giving, to really helping our families, to helping take the stress off parents, to providing, to use it. We have billions of dollars in tax dollars in America.
Yeah.
So many of those tax dollars go to defense. What if they went to helping families earn a living wage, have better health care, better education opportunities, parenting classes for people, helping people who are abusive rather than jailing them or
Yeah.
hate, let's help heal the victim inside each other. That's the real access to stopping the cycle.
That's definitely very true, but I'm a little bit afraid that we're now living in times that that's not going to happen very soon. If we look what's going on in the world, and if we already look actually in the state of being that the United States is financially, and also some other countries, but specifically the United States, and also how they spend their dollars right now. They spend it in situations outside of their own country, while the country needs it so much. And so yeah, and what's coming in the coming years, in the coming time, what's going to happen in the next 5 years, we don't know. But all I know now is that yeah, they are preparing for the worst.
Right.
So they're spending all their dollars in defense even
I
more
know.
than
I
before.
know. I
That's
know.
what's happening.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know what will happen. And I will just live through it the best that I possibly can. But,
Mm,
the more people that can understand what's happening in the world, whether it's wars around the world and tyrants taking over in different countries, if we can see that as a call for help for humanity, and more people can be educated and more people can embody healthy human relations, maybe we have a chance
yeah.
to put people in power who are actually healthy human beings.
Yeah.
And
So
I don't
true.
know if it'll happen or not.
No, true. Yeah. Yeah. And the last thing I want to say is I think the power of the media is something to not underestimate. And
Right.
I think now with this online media that we have today, we have power that we never had before.
That's
And
right.
if we use that in a very smart and strategic way, then we can make a real difference actually on a large scale. We see already the consequences of that the mainstream media is so changed over the years actually in their narrative, in their opinions, in how they share news, because of the online media, which should be based on free of speech. Actually, everybody should just say whatever they want, and everybody can say whatever they want on online media. And also there is a cancel culture happening. We already talked about that before, but I want to say here actually that for me, at least my mission is to find ways and strategies to use that medium or that online medium. There are different mediums online, of course, to use that as much as possible, as much as I can, to get as much eyeballs that
Right.
are possible. And there are a lot of other people that are more in power. They try to do the same thing,
Right.
and that's for me some hope. And I see actually that can change the tides, and hope that we can change ourselves, we can change our future, and yeah, can change
Yeah,
everything
I
in a good
totally agree
way.
with that. And I think that what you just said is inside of an even bigger issue that I have become aware of, just actually in talking about all this stuff. And that is that just because we can do something doesn't mean we should.
Yeah, yeah.
Just because we can use social media to proliferate misinformation and hatred and targeting doesn't mean we should.
Mm,
Just because we can drive a car doesn't mean we should drive it into a crowd.
yeah,
And I think that's part of rebuilding our mental health, that we actually look at how we use the resources and the powers and the strengths and the abilities that we have, and are they functional? Are
yeah,
they contributing to our own welfare and sustainability?
yeah.
Just because we can put um, chemicals all over our fields, should we?
Mm, no,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah, totally. Yeah.
So I love that. I love what you said, because, the more people that have the awareness, let's use what we have as a power, as a tool, as a
Yeah.
resource here to contribute to us getting along and creating a world we all want to live in, the better.
Yeah. And you mentioned awareness. And again, that was also sitting in my head. It's like bringing people to that level of awareness that just necessary actually to make that reflex to go online and find the right sources with the right information, inform yourself
Right,
and create your own
right,
opinions and
right,
see how you can change things instead of playing video games all day long and isolate yourself from the world. That's not a
right,
solution.
right,
Yeah, I think that's a positive note to end this conversation. Um,
great.
before we end, I would like to ask one question that I mostly ask: is there a certain topic or something that we haven't talked about that you think it's important to mention?
Hmm. Um, well, um, I think that there are some big paradigm shifts that we're looking at making that we just sort of talked a little bit around the edge of, and but they're big topics. But I'll just mention that I think within that power over, um, moving toward a power shared paradigm of human relations, we're looking at what's the appropriate place for competition within a context of cooperation. I think we're looking at the whole issue of equality. Are we actually seeing one another as equally deserving of the best treatment? Or are we still living in a mindset that some people are less equal and less deserving?
Yeah.
Um, so there's some other big paradigm shifts, and there's a lot more to be said about how do we embody the healing principles ourselves. But I think the bottom line, and I'll just say this because it's impossible to encapsulate all that, but I think the bottom line is of good mental health that would save us from ourselves is if we all treated other people the way we want them to treat us. It really comes down to that.
Mm,
That all of the injuries that I've ever seen a person bring to therapy, and everybody has a different story, is an injury to love and safe belonging. And if
mm,
we committed to love and safe belonging for everyone, we'd be out of this mess. And I know that it's easy to say and extremely difficult to do in the
mm.
world we live in. But somehow we have to hold that light at the end of the tunnel so we
Yeah.
know where we're going.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. We have to believe that the future looks bright, for sure. You have to do our best. You have to
We
do
have
our
to do our
best.
best. We have to do our
Yeah,
best. Yeah.
totally, totally. Yeah. So, if people want to reach out to you or people want to get in touch with the work that you do, where can people find you?
Yeah, the best place is my website, which is www.phyllisleavitt.com. You can contact me through my website. You can email me at phyllis@phyllisleavitt.com.
Hmm.
Have lots of interviews on YouTube. I have blogs on Substack. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn. And, I try to post really informative, diagnostic, hopeful messages as much as I possibly can. You can get my book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any of the major booksellers. It's America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. And one thing I will say, if you do contact me on my website, and you will get a free copy of a PDF that I created that is called "The Six Secrets to Repairing Relationships After Conflict," and
Mm,
that is a personal little course that I based on one of the chapters in my book,
mm.
which I referenced. And I'm also in the process of making a course out of my entire book that will be available sometime in the pretty near future.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Yeah, yeah. I would definitely recommend people to look at your website and download it for sure. So yeah, Phyllis, thanks a lot for these amazing insights in the work that you do. I think it's really important that our audience knows about this, that they learn about this, I hope they get some takeaways out of this. And I really would like to encourage you to continue doing everything that you do. And I feel and I see that you're very ambitious, and we need more people like you.
Mm.
And I do my part on that as well. And I hope I can do it as long as I can. You do the same, and there are many others out there. So it was really amazing to have you here. I already think like it would be interesting to do a second episode a little bit later after the
Yeah,
elections, not right after,
yeah.
but like some time after, just as a follow up to see
I
how
would
things
love
are
to.
going. Yeah,
I would
how
love
things.
to. I would love
Yeah,
to. And let
yeah.
me just say thank you for all that you do, because I know that what you do is such a valuable service to so many people. And I'm really so happy and honored to be a guest on your show and to be able to participate in the great work that you're doing. I really
Mm,
appreciate you.
thank you.